thank you everyone for joining another Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth podcast. We're delighted to have with us today the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, Michael McCormack. I guess we'll kick off, Michael. As someone in government over the past year and a bit, how has it been, and what challenges have you faced dealing with the pandemic and obviously the general kind of situation in Australia now?
Well, first of all, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Sunil, for inviting me to this august forum, and appreciate the people who will be joining us on this live stream and perhaps watching it sometime in the future. But it has been a challenging year. It's also been a year where we've mourned the loss of so many lives right across the world, and Australia has been no different. We've lost 910 people. 910 Australians have lost their lives through the global pandemic. We've had, of course, a death rate that has been, in one sense, we've kept it to a minimum because Australians have, thankfully, been very good in social distancing, wearing masks where asked to do so, doing all the right things, taking part, of course, in self-isolation when requested to do so. The quarantining has been very rigid when we've had returning Australians coming back from overseas. We did have an outbreak in Victoria mid-last year, which cost the lives of more than 800. If you take those people out of the equation, we would have had only 100 or so deaths all up. But still in all, those families and friends, of course, mourn their loved ones. But relatively speaking, compared to many other countries, most other countries, we've done exceedingly well. And that is because we are an island nation. We put in place very quickly a ban on international arrivals. We closed our borders very quickly, and we were able to, I suppose, monitor the situation as such. And being an island nation, we also that helped us with people not being able to travel as freely as they used to. And then, of course, because we are made up of 6 states and 2 territories, and they have, those premiers and chief ministers have jurisdictional responsible for their own states and territories. They also put in travel bans, so they closed their borders internally, and that, of course, whilst it created some hardship for business, it also very much kept people to their own localities. And by doing that, and by following the best possible medical advice right the way through, Commonwealth and state territory governments have been able to ensure that Australians have been able to keep safe, and hence why we have had a very good record as far as the case numbers and the death rates are concerned.
I think it's evident to see that Australia obviously dealt with this really strongly, especially in comparison to some of the countries across the globe. And although the death count is 910, it's considerably lower than what we have here in the UK. You touched on it there in terms of why Australia has done well. Are there sort of any other reasons you'd say why, in the sense of that your death rate has been, in comparison to a lot of large populations, so low?
Well, we've got a population of only around 26 million, so it's not a huge population. But when you think we've only had probably, if you look at the numbers in just the last week or so, there's only been a handful of new cases each and every day. That is pretty remarkable, really. We have got a very good health system here in Australia, a very good health system, both public and private. The federal government too has stumped up an extraordinary amount of money, hundreds of billions of dollars, to support the economy. We put in place a measure called JobKeeper, which connected employees to their workplace to ensure that businesses were able to keep their doors open. We also extended the unemployment provisions such that those people who could not find work, or indeed those people who found themselves unemployed for the first time, for some of them in their working lives, found themselves unemployed, that they had that dignity of being able to get not only a minimum amount of money, but indeed an increased amount of money, $1,500 a fortnight, to ensure that even those people who were on casual hours were able to get that money that they otherwise would have not been receiving. And so that actually also helped generate money through the economy, so that the people who were either on casual hours or all of a sudden lost all of their hours, or indeed those people who were still connected to their employer and being, I suppose, sponsored by the federal government, they still had money in their pockets. And what they did is those people, particularly those at the lower end of the scale who found themselves with perhaps more money than they otherwise would have normally in a pre-COVID situation, they spent that money. And that also generated and sloshed money around the economy at a time when many businesses were feeling the pinch, and many businesses needed that cash to be circulating around the economy. It kept the economy going. And thus, the unemployment rate, which many pundits were expected to be around 10 or 11, perhaps even higher percent, were vastly wrong, because the last unemployment figures we got for March were in fact 5.6%. So that's a pretty good measure, given the fact that JobKeeper is now off. It has finished as a measure. We're now into April, and so we finished the JobKeeper arrangements at the end of March, and so the economy is still going along nicely. Some of the government support has tapered off because we needed to also get Australians back to work, and many of the businesses are reopening. Many of the hospitality areas which were otherwise closed, or pubs and clubs which were otherwise not able to open for business or shut because there were just no people around, have reopened. And I've been around to many places in regional Australia, both large regional hubs and small country towns, and you can see that it's almost back to normal. Even in the central business districts of major cities, you can see that the activity is somewhere back to being at pre-COVID levels. Yes, there are many businesses still hurting, and yes, the government support is still there for manufacturing, for so many other sectors of the economy, which are still, particularly aviation. We've just put in place a package of $1.2 billion of support on top of the considerable $2.7 billion of previous support, to ensure that by way of a tourism package, by way of paying for half the price of a ticket to go interstate to one of those areas which would normally be awash with international tourists, which, because of the shutdown of our borders, our international borders, they were getting no visitors from overseas whatsoever. So we're getting Australians, and we're campaigning. We've got a campaign, holiday at home, spend your money at a particularly a regional location or one of those places which would normally have plenty of overseas travellers.
I guess the big challenge now, obviously, for most governments is the vaccine rollout, and then later down the line, obviously hoping to reopen to international travel, I guess, both ways. And so how is the rollout going in Australia? And I guess it's the second part of the question, when do you see kind of a bit of normality globally with international travel returning?
The second part of the question is very difficult to answer. Just yesterday, we had the first of the two-way flights between New Zealand and Australia. So previously, whilst it was one way, we've now got travellers going from both sides of the Tasman. Australians going to New Zealand, and New Zealanders coming here. Previously, it was just a one-way travel bubble, but now we've got both countries travelling to and from, and we've got those arrangements in place that they don't have to quarantine. So such that that was hugely welcome, because a lot of New Zealanders have family here, a lot of New Zealanders work here in Australia, and of course, when the borders shut, many of them were stranded. And so that's a welcome sign. We're having the two ministries of transport between Australia and Singapore in discussions, very much preliminary discussions at the moment, about what we might do as far as a travel bubble between those two. Look, I would like to think that other bubbles will potentially open up between many of the Pacific Island nations, perhaps Korea, South Korea, perhaps Japan, but too early to tell. Let's see how the New Zealand one goes. And of course, even news reports today suggested that there was a community transmission case in New Zealand, and what effect was that going to play out on the Australia-New Zealand bubble? That said, we've had around about 1.5 million vaccinations, jabs in the arm delivered thus far. We'd like to see that have been more. There was a bit of a hold-up with some of the supplies of the vaccinations. We actually have sovereign manufacturing capability with the AstraZeneca vaccination. We're doing that at a place in a factory called CSL, manufacturer down in Melbourne, in Victoria. We're looking obviously at sovereign manufacturing of other vaccines too, which get approved by what's called our Therapeutic Goods Administration, which is our medical our medical experts who decide on what drugs and what medicines will be made available and are safe to be used by Australians. And we've acquired another 20 million doses or vaccinations of the Pfizer variety from Europe. So we've said all along that we will vaccinate Australians as well as all those in the Pacific Island nations, because that's our neighbourhood and that's what good neighbours do. The Prime Minister has not set a deadline as to when that vaccination program will be completed, but we'd like it to be well in advance by the last quarter this year. And of course, we're encouraging all Australians to be vaccinated, even though we're not making it mandatory. But of course, many businesses will ensure, just like we've got those QR codes as you enter any hospitality area, just the same as when you go onto an aeroplane, you have to fill out forms, you have to download the QR code on your telephone. There will be companies which will make it mandatory, compulsory, that you would have had a vaccination if you are to travel, if you are to go into their business, if you are to go into their hospitality area. So whilst it won't be mandatory, we can't enforce it. We will be encouraging, obviously, and by its very nature, people will be asked to do it. And Australians, at any rate, have a high immunisation rate. Most Australians, well in the high 90% rate, get their children vaccinated against smallpox and measles and all those other nasties. And so I'm expecting a very high take-up rate of course, the COVID-19 vaccination.
Trade is a big talking point here in the UK at the moment. We've seen Liz Truss do a fantastic job for us in agreeing multiple trade agreements, and we're hearing a big trade deal worth huge sums of money with Australia is very close and thereabouts. How do you see the future of UK and Australia developing in the coming months and years?
I think it's very promising, and our Trade Minister, Dan Tehan, is winging his way to secure more trade deals as we speak. We've 1 in 4 jobs in regional Australia is reliant on trade, is reliant on Australian trade, and so many of our sectors are reliant on strong trading opportunities with not only our near neighbours, but those who we've had traditional links with, obviously the UK and Great Britain, but also Europe and the Americas. We just sent our first shipment of barley, as I understand, to Mexico, and we're looking at diversifying much of our trade to ensure that we don't always have all our eggs in one basket. Of course, China has been a very good trading partner for Australia, $149 billion worth of trade with China. But obviously, it's just one player, albeit an important one for our industries, both food and fibre, and of course resources. Our agriculture grew from around $60 billion to $66 billion as a sector, as an industry, despite going on. That's on the back of a crippling drought, one of the worst in living memory. Then we were beset by bushfires. not last summer, but the one before. Many communities in regional Australia suffered from floods. And of course, then we had the global pandemic. And so despite all of that, we increased our output in agriculture by $6 billion. As well, we increased our resources sector. So that's for the export of iron ore, of coal, but also things which are going to the composition of these little things. Mobile phones, those rare earths and those remarkable little minerals that Australia has plenty of, and that other countries require to manufacture those things. And so I'm very buoyant. I'm very buoyed, by the prospect of increasing trade, of making agriculture a $100 billion enterprise by 2030, which is not only the government's aim, but also the National Farmers Federation, which is the overarching body of our those who have that agricultural endeavour for an occupation, but also growing our resources sector. My Resources Minister Keith Pitt is determined to grow that sector, and increase growing that. And despite everything that was thrown against us, that industry also is growing. And despite the challenges for some of our markets, we've been able to increase our resources exports too. Australia's a trading nation, always has been, always will be. We grow 3 times as much food as we could possibly eat ourselves. We can feed, we grow enough food to feed 75 million people. We have only around 25, 26 million Australians. So obviously we've got plenty of food there to help feed other nations besides. And we like to think that our food and fibre is amongst the best. I always say it is the best in the world. Others might disagree because, everybody thinks their own patch is the best, but we have, very, very stringent, clean and green farming practices such that it is the best produce that you could possibly hope to acquire and eat.
You mentioned China, and I will come back to that in more detail in a bit, but it's been well publicised, obviously, over the last year. There's been a lot of back and forth between Australia and China for various reasons. Did that lead you as a government to think about maybe diversifying your kind of trading options a bit more, looking beyond China, and kind of growing big economies, so, I don't know, Bangladesh, India, places like that, to kind of diversify that portfolio?
Oh, look, indeed, Paul, and we've been doing that. It hasn't just been the fact that there have been a few challenges in recent times. We've been diversifying our trade. We've entered into a Trans-Pacific Partnership 11 agreement. It was at the time when, in fact, the then American President Donald Trump decided not to pursue it, but Australia did. Now, that provided us with a more than $10 trillion opportunity to enter a collection of countries which had shared interests in the Pacific in increasing trading opportunities. Now, not only that, we've signed free trade agreements with South Korea, with Japan, in more recent times with Peru, with Indonesia. Our relations with India have always been very cordial, and I can remember when Narendra Modi came to and actually addressed our parliament about the trade opportunities, and we've been working on making sure that we, if we don't at least clinch that ultimate goal of a free trade agreement with India, we still do a lot of trade with India. I know from even my own area in southwest New South Wales, the amount of chickpeas that we send to India is quite incredible. And of course, we've got Barry O'Farrell at the moment, who's over there as our ambassador, as our trade envoy, as our, he ticks a lot of boxes. Barry is a former New South Wales Premier, indeed, making sure that any opportunity with India is not only addressed, but indeed fulfilled. And so the opportunities, of course, with the UK and the Brexit situation, I think too are very promising. And we've always had a great relationship with Britain. That'll no doubt continue. Whilst we like to beat you in cricket, we do want to continue those cordial relations as far as trade is concerned.
I would love to sort of, at some stage, probably get into a discussion on your sort of political journey, but as a sort of pro-conservative and pro-Commonwealth platform, I wanted to get your thoughts on what you see for the future of the Commonwealth.
Well, the Westminster system and the constitutional monarchy remain pivotal to Australian life. We, of course, mourned very dearly for the loss of Prince Philip. I know even those Australians who would want us to become a republic were very mindful of what he brought to our nation, and the many visits he made to our nation, and the great respect that has always been held across our country for the Duke of Edinburgh, and certainly the Queen is as much loved here in Australia as she is anywhere else in the world. I know the passing of Prince Philip, it won't change any of that fondness that Australia has for the monarchy. I know it. I know we love having royal visits, irrespective of who the royals are, whether it's princes, the princes, or their wives, or whoever the case might be. We very much cherish those strong ties. Look, that said, we with the situation with the Commonwealth, with Britain leaving the European Union as such, we want to forge stronger ties on a trading and economic relationship. I know your Prime Minister Boris Johnson and our Scott Morrison have regular discussions, as you'd expect they would. We've got so much in common on so many themes and so many traditions that it will be continuing to be maintained, and we welcome that.
It's great to speak so positively about the Commonwealth. We've seen New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and ourselves, the UK, all speak at great lengths about the possibility of a CANZUK agreement, sort of increased trade, foreign policy, cooperation between the four states, and much more. Is CANZUK something that you think could potentially work well?
Well, look, I know it's been supported by a lot of those small L liberal think tanks that are often conducted. I know that many of those groups have sort of put that idea forward, think that it's a good thing, working in conjunction or on a similar lines to a European Economic Union as such. Look, it can only help. It can only help, and I know particularly the relationships that we have through Five Eyes, particularly the relationships we have in cybersecurity, particularly the relationships we have on a defence and diplomacy stage. Then to do that, particularly on a trading stage, could only be beneficial. And so we'll obviously continue to play a part in those talks, in those discussions, and see where it takes us.
There's so much we can cover on foreign policy, but I want to shift slightly more towards domestic areas and almost begin with your political journey. I understand you were a newspaper editor before getting involved in politics.
I was. Don't hold it against me. Not quite Fleet Street, but certainly I was the editor of a daily newspaper in which, albeit a country newspaper, but our group had 58 journalists in it. They were heady days in the newspaper game. We were converting as obviously having spent some time as a Sir Harry Britton Fellow in the UK with the Commonwealth Press Union. And it was the time when newspapers were converting from black and white to colour, converting from very much the technology was also changing. Many of the papers when I first started used typewriters. In fact, they all did, and they were converting to, of course, computerisation. Printing was even going from hot lead. That had long finished. It was going to full-page pagination by the time I exited the industry. And so, they were good days in the newspaper game. I enjoyed them very much, and they set me up for what I'm doing now.
Did you always have that sort of ambition to be involved in politics? Because obviously, being the leader of the National Party, Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, shows you have been extremely successful in politics. And what was that, or was that sort of ambition even when you were a newspaper editor, that one day you could be involved in politics?
I went back further than that. I used to like being on the debating team at school, and I can remember when I was in Year 8, I was on the Year 10 debating team, and so I was very much the youngest member of the school debating team. Look, I always loved debating. I loved also speaking up for the, comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, I suppose, when it came to being on the newspaper, supporting community campaigns for better infrastructure, better services for the city. And I suppose being in politics is an extension of that. When you do become a community and campaigning advocate for a better deal for your own community, people then encourage you to take that next step, to put your hand up for public office. I admire anybody from any walk of life and from any political background or persuasion, I suppose, to put their hand up for public office if they're lucky enough, and I was fortunately to be elected by the people of my constituency to represent them in Canberra. It's a humbling privilege to go to Canberra to represent people in the federal government of the nation, and then to be able to be honoured with the task then of leading your own political party, and then of course becoming the second in charge of the country when you're in government is a great honour, and it's something that of course you don't dream that you'll ever fulfil. It's not really even a dream. You just happen to be the right place, the right person, the right place, the right time, and you just do the job as best you can. It involves a lot of travel. It involves a lot of nights away from home. So you do miss out on those family things, and you do get to, you are away from home. There is a huge expectation, and they're very, very long hours that you're expected to do, but you're not going to do it forever. So you do it as well as you can for as long as you can, and go as hard as you can. And if you make the world a better place by doing it, and if you can certainly help your own local community by way of being that person in that job, then that's what it's all about. And later on, when you look back on your career and your life, and if you sort of think, well, I played a bit of a part in helping that piece of infrastructure get built, or helping that change of life that meant so much for people who could otherwise not have spoken up for themselves, and that led to a better service, or perhaps a medicine being put on a pharmaceutical benefit scheme that we've got here in Australia that meant a better quality of life for somebody, then your job's been done. It's been worth it.
I think what's fascinating, I'm sure you've noticed this more than most, having been a newspaper editor around now in politics, is the impact social media has had since, especially in the last, you'd say, 10, 20 years. And it seems some of the issues as Liberal national parties of Australia face are similar to the Conservative Party here in the UK. I think there is a general fact, if you like, that as Conservative thinkers, we generally lose in terms of the likes and retweets world of Twitter, Instagram, etc. But the results obviously show something very different when talking about the whole population. And so it's fair to say social media doesn't necessarily represent our countries totally accurately. Are there lessons?
Life is not governed by those who are on Twitter. Life is governed by those who turn up. Life is governed by those who are running businesses. And quite frankly, Prime Minister Morrison called them the quiet Australians, but at the last election, and those quiet Australians haven't gone away. They're still quiet, but they're going about their day-to-day lives. They're running businesses. They're taking risks. They're spending money on capital equipment, and they're making sure that they keep the wheels of the economy going. They're also dropping kids off at school. They're getting involved in their local Rotary clubs, or their local sporting or community groups, their church groups, those sorts of things. They're not necessarily sitting all day tweeting the latest hate-filled message to a politician, or making their their views felt, making their views felt as the lights go out here. Sure they'll come back on. They're not making their views felt on social media, and you know, some of those bots, anonymous complainants on social media, really they should take a good long hard look at themselves and wonder what real purpose are they in life. I get trolled by a number of people who've you know, put up tens of thousands of tweets, but they're only being followed by, you know, a few dozen people, and you think to yourself, they're spending most of their hours on Twitter or on social media writing hate-filled messages about people when no one's actually looking at it. I mean, and yes, admittedly, I've got the Prime Minister ringing me anyway. I'll ring him later. That's pretty funny. But you know, I just, yeah, I just ignore that stuff because if you read it and thought that was exactly how everybody felt, then you know, you wouldn't get on and do much at all. Well, no doubt the Prime Minister was just ringing to pass on his best wishes to all of your viewers, and he's actually got up to he's had to leave our cabinet, not our cabinet meeting, but our meeting early this afternoon to fly up to the Gold Coast to give a speech in front of the business community up there. As I understand, he gave a rather landmark speech last night to the Business Council of Australia about setting the agenda forward post-COVID, and so we're very much focused on that at the moment. We're not focused on what people are saying on social media. We're focused on getting Australia back on track. First of all, delivering on the health outcomes to keep Australians safe and healthy, and secondly, to get those economic outcomes, to keep people in jobs, to keep people with their businesses open. I mean, that's been our focus the whole way through, but taking the best possible medical advice. And I've got to say, it is a great thing to serve in a government being led by somebody like Scott Morrison, who has really stepped up to the challenges thrown against him in recent years.
I think what you said about quiet Australians is something very similar to what we face here in the UK. We tend to call them shy conservatives, is our sort of tagline. So it's very similar, and I don't think a day passes sort of at the moment in this country where somebody or something is getting cancelled, or the term woke, as we strongly dislike on the sort of platform it is used. Are there lessons?
Well, you've got to keep your values and you've got to keep your principles. And if you're not true to those core principles and values that you first entered politics in, that you first put your hand up for public office for, and I think it would do well for most politicians to go back and read their maiden speeches as to why they initially ran for office. And you know, that's what we are all about. That's what we've always been about, Scott and I, and the government that we lead, and that is our core values and principles, and making sure that we, you know, keep faith with what we said we'd do right from the outset.
Yeah, I've seen you. I think that's a great point, and you know, I've seen you talk really well on social media and censorship in general. We've hosted multiple podcasts on this topic. We've had subsequent speakers talk about sort of thoughts on some of the power, if you like, of social media firms, and it's been long debated whether they should have so much power in controlling what we can or can't say, especially when they are not elected officials. And I think there are a lot of sort of freedom of speech issues, and a lot of them are subjective. I think most of us would agree on outright violent messaging, but more often than not, it tends to be quite a blurred line. And some actions, you could argue, from these firms suggest they are adopting political stances. I think
it was Voltaire who said that I don't agree with what they say, but I'll defend their right to say it. And that is true, but at times there has to be a level of decency and a level of you know, where people are, you know, what they say is harmful to society. Well, what they say, you know, goes against the grain of what other decent people would have foisted upon them. And, you know, but by the same token too, I've been very pleased to be in a government where we've made sure that some of those large multi-corporate faceted international organisations can't just come in then also and ride roughshod over our local media organisations and not pay a cent for it. So I know our Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, has been very aware of the need for, if you're going to operate in our media market in Australia, and the same organisations that played such an influence in the recent American election, but you're going to have to pay for it as well. You can't just come in here, operate in our market, not expect to pay an appropriate amount of tax for doing so.
I think it leads quite well onto something that our former Australian Prime Minister John Howard spoke in great detail on this platform on, which was on sort of identity politics and political correctness. He spoke incredibly, and one of the fascinating things he mentioned was how he believes too many people or politicians, more so maybe in America, are selecting the minority first, then picking policies rather than creating policies that just ultimately benefit society. He used small businesses fantastically as an example, where he mentioned you help Black people, white people, Indians, whoever. There's no color involved. Is there a rise in identity politics in Australia? And is that something you're seeing more so probably on the left wing movement, if you like?
Look, it's an interesting topic, and what we don't want to see is that small few, because they tend to get the headlines. So they might conduct a bit of a protest. There might be half a dozen of them. That might swell into a bit of a greater number, but the cause that they are running for any given day is not what the majority of people are thinking. They've got time to go and to do that protest. They've got time to get on social media and grind their axe for all they're worth. And they tend to get the headlines in mainstream media because it's something a bit different. They're saying something that's a bit outrageous, a bit outlandish, and all of a sudden, mainstream thinkers or people who are just getting on with their general daily lives are starting to think, well, maybe that is the normality. Maybe that is what the whole public is concerned, and it's dressed up as what everybody must surely be thinking, because it's trending on social media. It's getting a number of likes on Twitter. But again, as you quite correctly pointed out, it doesn't always hold true at the ballot box. Most Australians, they know what they want. They want to be able to have the services. They want to be able to have the roads and the rail and the connectivity as far as mobile phones and internet connection. They're not that obsessed with sometimes the cause de célèbre that some of our, dare I say, even our identity people who do follow identity politics, or people who are just trying to cause a sensation, are professing and putting up on social media. So I know our former leader, John Anderson, who's actually put his hand up for a Senate spot again after 15 years out of politics. He does podcasts particularly decrying identity politics and particularly decrying people who would otherwise try and sway general public opinion for their minority views. And of course, that's something that, if I suppose if we all had more time to do, we'd certainly do it. But at the moment, I've got a $110 billion infrastructure portfolio that I'm trying to roll out. I'm trying to build a first airport in Western Sydney, perhaps call it Sydney's second airport. I'm building a 1,700 kilometre rail line between Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne through inland Australia, and we've got about 34,000 or so infrastructure projects on the go at the moment. So that's taking up, as you would expect, and as the Prime Minister would want, most of my waking hours. But it is a concern that we do get people who would like to try and influence mainstream Australians to think that the things that they are most interested and affected by is something that everybody necessarily is interested and affected by, and it's not always the case. It was shown out at the last election, And I think if, as I go out and get and talk to real, ordinary, everyday Australians, they're not telling me that some of the things that are trending on Twitter are generally the things that are keeping them awake at night.
As you just mentioned, you also have the infrastructure portfolio, obviously, alongside being the Deputy Prime Minister, and it's quite an exciting time to have that portfolio. There's so many infrastructure projects that are about to start going on in Australia at the moment. Have there been any challenges with funding or getting things started over the past year with COVID, or was most of that already in place kind of beforehand? And
Well, pleasingly, just a couple of points I'll make quickly about that is that when I took over as the Infrastructure Minister and Deputy Prime Minister back in February 2018, the infrastructure budget was $50 billion. Now it's $110 billion, and that supports 100,000 workers. There was a real risk that COVID was going to close some, if not much, of those infrastructure projects down. There was a real risk at the time that because of internal border closures and general alarm within the community that supermarkets were not going to be stocked with the goods that they normally would, because when COVID first hit, there was quite a bit of panic within communities, and many supermarkets were in fact raided. I mean, I don't know about in the UK, but there was a shortage of toilet paper there. For everybody seemed to think they needed 10 rolls when they went to the toilet rather than just the usual one, or just a few sheets thereof. And we were at great risk of running out of things, out of the staples of life. Well, it was only because of the good relationship that I had with my state and territory ministers of all political persuasion, I have to say. In fact, we've got we've got more Labor states than we've got coalition states. And yet, despite that, and despite me being the only national largely in those meetings, I was able to work with those ministers and get a national freight code such that trucks were not being held up at borders, that they were able to have the free flow, free access across jurisdictional lines. And we set that up. We established that national freight code within hours. Didn't take days or weeks, and that was because of the good relationship I had with those ministers of different political persuasion than me, mostly, and I was quite proud of that fact. So we haven't actually stopped construction. In fact, if anything, we've cranked it up because we put in place a $2 billion road safety initiative that the states and us are spending at the moment, and we're building at the moment, even just down to little things like rumble strips and separations, strengthening shoulders on the sides of roads. Now, they might seem much, but in a country the size of Australia, to spend $2 billion on those sorts of initiatives and upgrades, it means the world of difference to those local communities, and it actually saves lives. But we also put in place a $1.5 billion local roads and community infrastructure program, so that the 537 local councils across the nation could all benefit from either putting a lick of paint on their town hall, or upgrading a roundabout or a rotary, or whatever you might call it in the UK. I know they call it rotaries in the States. You know, that meant the world of difference, because it meant high-vis workers on the ground, shovels in the ground, excavators pushing dirt around, and it meant the difference between those councils having workers and perhaps not. And so we've continued at a pace with our infrastructure rollout, and if anything, we've actually increased it. We've increased the amount of money that we're spending on water infrastructure, something so vital to our country. And so we're getting on with the job. We're not letting COVID or any other natural disaster, that has befallen our nation in recent times, slow us down any.
I think it's interesting you mentioned about working sort of with the Labour Party. I know in the last sort of Western Australian election they did reasonably well. And of course, the Australian Labour Party is very different to the UK Labour Party. And most of us in this country would accept, that the current leader of the Labour Party is nowhere near as left-leaning as his predecessor in Jeremy Corbyn. But there is still a real subsequent far left-leaning movement amongst various UK Labour MPs. Is that also the case for Australia, or do you think there's sort of a bit more centralist mind frame there?
Oh, well, look, what I always say about Labor is don't believe what they say, just believe what they do. Well, we've had a very good record here in Australia. We've, as a Conservative, I suppose, coalition government, we've won 7 out of the last 9 elections. You could almost say one of the other ones was a draw. Labor were supported by a couple of independents, and we went into a minority opposition, or we were in opposition for a term of government when Julia Gillard became Australia's first, I suppose, elected. She became Australia's first female Prime Minister when she overthrew Kevin Rudd, and then she went to the election, and she was in a minority government with the support of some country independents who went against the thrust and theme and best wishes of their electorate to support a Labor government. But anyway, that's water under the bridge. Julia Gillard has done some fine things in the space of mental health and education since leaving Parliament, and I wish her every bit of success. In fact, I reached out to her when I became Deputy Prime Minister to get some advice, but maybe that's just me. I like to be a bit more bipartisan than some other of my some other politicians perhaps would. But look, we've got an opposition leader here in Australia at the moment by the name of Anthony Albanese, and look, when you're in opposition, you often say the things that are going to try and bring down the government. Of course, that's the nature of opposition, and we're on a very slender majority in what's called the House of Representatives, the People's House in Australia. We don't have the majority in the Senate, which is the State's House, the upper house, the clearing house, whatever you like to call it. So it is difficult, because any of our legislation that we want to get through, we've got to make sure that it first gets past the House of Representatives, but secondly, we have to garner support from some of the minor parties in the upper house to ensure that its success, its legislative success. So, but look, Anthony Albanese is like any other leader from the left. Again, you don't believe what they say they're necessarily going to do. Prior to an election, you see what they would do if they were in government. We've only seen just in recent times the fact that Joe Biden has proposed increasing corporate tax by 7% to 28% in the United States to pay for climate policies. Now, I didn't hear that prior to the election, but that's what Labor governments do. That's what left-leaning governments do. They make people pay for their own excesses. They make people pay for their own little flirtations with social engineering policies that they bring in. And mark my words, in Australia, if we get a Labor government, that Union Jack on the flag, they'll be discussing that. They'll be discussing whether or not the date Australia Day, which is January 26, whether it should change. They'll be discussing all the sorts of things that won't put bread and butter on people's tables, won't put any more money into people's pockets. In fact, it'll be less. Won't move the dial anywhere as far as the economic narrative is concerned. But it's all about changing the way we live and the way our traditional values are. I don't think it helps our society any, but then again, you'd expect me to say that I'm from the other side of politics. But we will always make sure that we are fiscally responsible. We'll make sure that we provide within our budget, within our means, the services that our communities and our people would expect. That's why I've been proud to be part of a government that was so nearly close to producing the first surplus in a dozen years. Our opposition hasn't produced a surplus for about 30 years, but we were so close prior to COVID. We would have actually handed a surplus budget down last May. We didn't quite get there because of COVID. We've then put in $251 billion of measures to support the economy, as you'd expect us to, but we were only able to do that because we had the fiscal responsibility and discipline to have an economy that was going well enough to support that. I would have hated to have seen how we would have gotten along as a country, as a nation, had we not had that fiscal discipline since being re-elected back in 2013.
I think that's a sort of good note and a good area to start to wrap things up with a sort of final question. And hopefully we can do this again at some point, and maybe even in person.
Yeah, happy to.
I'll end with, we have the Australia next federal election in 2022. What are the National Party plans going forward for it, and what sort of areas would you be focusing on?
Well, we'd certainly be focused on making sure that those great strides that regional Australia has taken through all the natural disasters and through COVID, all the great strides in making regional Australia one of those areas where people see it as a place of safety. I've got to say, regional Australia has been the safest place, not just in our nation, but indeed in all of the world in which to live right through this global pandemic. Many of our communities have not had a single case of COVID, and those which did certainly had very few cases. And so, we've been lucky in that regard, but we've also managed it well. And regional Australians have been magnificent in making sure that they complied with all the requests made of them by the health experts, by our Chief Medical Officer, by our Secretary of the Department of Health and others. And so to build on that, to make sure that we can continue to grow agriculture and resources, which are two important sectors of the regional economy and national economy, that's going to be vital. And to build the infrastructure, to continue to build the inland rail, to continue to do all the sorts of things to make people want to move from the cities into regional Australia are going to be important. I mean, in the late last year, in the last quarter of last year, I think it was the September quarter actually, 7,782 Sydney-siders moved to the regions. The number for a similar period for Melbourne meant that 11,500 Melburnians chose to move to a regional area. Now that's a huge shift in what would normally be people moving to the capital cities, and sometimes our best exports out of our country towns are our young people. Well, we're giving young people the reason to not only stay, but to stay, have families, have good and well-paying and meaningful jobs, and to build up those regional areas like never before. And I'd like to be able to build on that in the next budget and in the next over the next election cycle as we move towards that ballot, whenever that might be. The Prime Minister has said that he wants to go full term, and so that means that we won't have an election, as you quite correctly point out, Sunil, until 2022. So that's when we're aiming to have the election. We'll run full term and hopefully get re-elected, because we jolly well deserve to be. We've done a good job. We've managed the economy. We've managed COVID-19, and hopefully Australians will place their faith in us again to continue to do that job, which is, I have to say, very humbling. We don't take any day in government for granted. We do everything so that such that Australians know that we've got their back, and we put Australians first.
It's been amazing having you on today, Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack. I really hope it's not too long again before we're able to do this event, and like I said, ideally in person. And I want to wish you the best of luck going forward.
Look forward to it. Okay, all the very best.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.